I'm Arlen Geyer. Today I want to talk about depth of field. Depth of field is the distance in front of and behind the point that you have focused on that's also in focus. So in fact, actually you're focused on a very specific point. So right now the camera is focused on me, but the parrot may also seem to be in focus, and the tree behind me may seem to be in focus as well. But the focus actually just gets a little less as it goes further forward and further back, and then a little less and a little less, until eventually things get rather out of focus. So if I come up like this, I get out of focus. And if I come back here and keep going back, I will get out of focus. Now, how quickly that happens is a function of several different factors. One of them actually has nothing to do with the camera, and that is presentation size. So you may have noticed when you look at the LCD screen on your camera, which is only maybe 3 inches wide, that usually everything looks in focus. But then if you display that full size on a computer screen, you may discover that there are a lot of things that are not in focus. You may even discover that nothing's in focus. But you may also typically discover that some things are not in focus that were when you saw it on that tiny LCD screen. This is because the bigger you make it, the more exaggerated that out of focusedness becomes. So presentation size is one of the factors. The other 3 factors, turn around and face the camera, will you? That's a good boy. The other 3 factors are ones that you actually control in the camera. They are the aperture that you shoot at, the distance your camera is away from your subject, or away from the point that's in focus, and your focal length, how long a lens you're using. So we will look at all 3 of those factors and see how they affect depth of field. So right now my aperture is on f5.6 and my focal length is around 50 millimeters. The distance to the parrot is what's in focus at the moment, and that distance is around maybe 8 feet or so. So I'm going to zoom in so that I'm using a very long focal length lens. I'm going to zoom all the way in to let's get that parrot back in focus. There we go. Okay, so the parrot's in focus. And notice now that the trees in the background are not at all in focus. So I have zoomed to 135 millimeters on this lens. So that's a fairly long focus lens. I haven't moved the camera and I haven't changed the aperture. But with that very long focal length lens, the background has gone out of focus. Now I'm going to go the opposite direction. I'm going to keep the parrot in focus, and I'm zooming all the way to 18 millimeters. The very other end of the extreme here. And now you'll see I'm still at f5.6, but everything's in focus. In fact, I'm probably pretty much in focus now. And as I walk back, I continue to stay in focus. So everything is in focus here at f5.6. Whereas when I was zoomed all the way to 135 millimeters, only the parrot was in focus. We'll go do that again. So there's that. And you can see that we've just got the parrot in focus, and moving forward from the parrot, as I move my hand up, you can see it very quickly goes out of focus. Okay, so the focus is very narrow at a very long focal length, like 135 millimeters. My focal length is now back to 50 millimeters. I'm still at f5.6. You notice at 50 millimeters and f5.6, we've still got a fair amount of focus. As I move my hand up, you see at what point it starts to go out of focus. And you can see looking back that the tree is just, depending on how large you're looking at this, the tree may or may not look in focus. If you're viewing this on a full screen, the tree probably looks a little out of focus. But now let's change from f5.6 to a much smaller aperture. Now we're at f14, and you can see that there's a lot more in focus. That back here is much more in focus than it was before. If the tree was looking slightly out of focus before, it should be looking quite in focus now. And even as I move a bit further forward from the parrot, I should still be in focus. Now I will go out of focus as I move in closer. And I'm going to move my hand up so you can see that it will go out of focus. But that the range of focus, the depth of field, the distance from what's in focus in front of the point that I'm focused on to what's in focus behind it is much greater with this smaller aperture. I'm back to f5.6 again. And so you should notice that the tree now is not quite as as sharp a focus as it was a moment ago. The next thing I want to do is the fourth control that will affect depth of field is the distance from the camera to the point that it's focused on. So I'm going to now move the camera. In everything I've done so far, the camera has been in the same position. So now I'm going to walk back and actually move the camera forward, and you will be able to watch live what happens to the background. I'm going to leave it on f5.6 and just walk forward, trying to keep the focus on the parrot. Okay, I've got the focus on the parrot, and here I am walking forward. And can you see that tree back there? Let's move a little bit to the side. Okay, so the focus on the parrot, and notice how the tree has gone out of focus. Because the closer I get to the subject, the less depth of field I have. So that tree that used to be in focus is now out of focus. And I'm going to do the same thing walking back, trying to keep my focus on the parrot. As I walk back, keeping the focus on the parrot, you notice that tree is getting into focus. So again, I'm focused on the parrot, but now I have much more depth of field because my focus point is much further away from the camera. So you can see that even the trees in the distance are in focus. So back to approximately my original location, somewhere in this neighborhood. And so here's the thing. Those are three things that the camera controls: the aperture, the subject distance, and the focal length. And if you're looking for shallow depth of field, where you don't want a whole lot in focus, if I have a small aperture, which is going to give me a lot of depth of field, then it probably doesn't matter if I move my camera closer or further away. I'm still going to get that deep depth of field that the small aperture will give me. If I move my camera way away from the subject, then I can use a very large lens opening, and I'm still going to get a great deal of depth of field because the camera is further away. If I use a very small focal length lens, like an 18mm lens, I could open up the lens all the way, and I could move in fairly close, and I'll probably still get a deep depth of field. With these small cameras, and this kind of camera qualifies as a small camera, the challenge is to get shallow depth of field. It's actually quite easy to get a lot of depth of field. So if you want shallow depth of field, you need to make sure that you are using all three of these considerations. So if I come back around again, and I'm looking for shallow depth of field, so I'm at 5.6, which is reasonably open already. So I'm going to say increase my focal length some, and I'm going to move in closer to the subject. So now let's get that focus back on the parrot. Okay. So now I've got the focus on the parrot, and I've got shallow depth of field. Of course, I've also got a really close cropping here, but that's the penalty I pay for getting this desirable shallow depth of field. So if I now zoom out to get the whole parrot, you can see that I have deep depth of field again because I have gone to 18 millimeter focal length, and that's going to give me that deep depth of field. So I can't get that wide angle view and shallow depth of field at the same time. And on the other hand, let's say I go back to that medium 50 millimeters, but I'm going to back off way back to here. And let's get the focus on the parrot again. Come on, parrot, get yourself in focus. There we go. So back here, I can still at f5.6, but you can see I have deep depth of field. So if you have one or two of those factors in the direction of deep depth of field, you're not likely to get shallow depth of field. So to get shallow, you need to have everything working in consort. Thanks, buddy, for your help.